He brought me tea. I was still in my robe. And the tie was loose, but I didn't tighten it. And he didn't look away. My name is Claire. I'm 44 years old, and I've been married for 12. No children. By choice. People used to ask why, then stopped when it became obvious I wasn't interested in explaining myself. That suited me just fine. Our house is quiet. That's the word I always come back to, not peaceful, not still. Quiet. A low hum of habit. Toothbrushes clicking against porcelain in unison. Grocery runs made with surgical efficiency. Sunday laundry, folded while the roast warms. It's a rhythm I once mistook for happiness. Sometimes I still do. Daniel, my husband, is good. Good the way fresh sheets are good. Predictable, clean, always there when you need them. I loved him once. Maybe I still do, in the way you love a worn sweater that doesn't fit quite right anymore, but you keep it because you've had it so long it's become a part of your shape. Then, last week, Evan arrived. Evan is Daniel's godson. 27. A blur of muscle and silence, fresh out of a long relationship that ended badly, according to the brief voicemail Daniel played on speaker before calling him back. He needs a place to land, Daniel said, already pulling sheets from the linen closet. Just for a little while. You remember him? I nodded. Vaguely. I'd seen him at a wedding once. Thin, shy, awkward in the way boys often are when they're not sure who they are yet. That image didn't match the man who walked through our front door 3 nights later, suitcase in one hand, a paper bag of books in the other. Taller, broader, quieter. He hugged Daniel, said thank you, then looked at me, not past me, not through me, but at me, and smiled. Just a polite smile. But I felt it, somewhere low and unexpected, like a tremor. Nothing serious. He settled in quickly. Took his coffee black, read long books with frayed covers, offered to cook one night, and didn't take offense when I declined. He asked questions, but never pressed. Spoke in short, neat sentences. Left no mess. I should have found it refreshing. Instead, I found myself wondering where he was in the house when I wasn't in the same room. I listened for the soft creak of the floorboards upstairs. I noted the way his footsteps paused outside the kitchen each morning, like he was gauging if I was already there. I pretended not to care. I did. The first real conversation we had was about tea. I had made myself a cup chamomile because the evening had that kind of air, and sat by the window, the one that looks over the back garden. Evan walked in, shirt loose around his frame, sleeves pushed up, and asked, "Do you like it strong?" I thought he meant something else. My pulse spiked stupidly. Then he gestured to the teacup. The tea. I'm not sure how long to let it steep. Oh, I said, smiling too quickly. It depends. He nodded, watching me over the rim of his own mug. We didn't say much else that night. But something started then, not a spark, not even a flicker. Just a pause. A wait. I noticed small things. The way he said my name. Claire. Soft, almost uncertain. The way his eyes lingered on mine an extra second when we passed in the hallway. The way he always said thank you when I made dinner, even if it was just reheated soup. Daniel didn't notice. He never notices small things anymore. Not because he doesn't care, I think, but because when you live with someone long enough, you stop needing to see them. They just exist, like a coat rack or the hum of the fridge. Useful. Reliable. Background. Evan was not background. The robe I wore that morning is old. Faded blue cotton. The fabric thinned in the sleeves, the tie frayed on one side. I've had it since before I met Daniel. It's never meant anything. Until it did. But I'll save that morning for later. For now, that first week, the days blurred together. Conversations about nothing. Shared spaces. A dinner with too much silence. I caught myself brushing my hair before coming downstairs, something I hadn't done in months. On Thursday, it rained. Hard, Persistent rain that drummed against the roof and made the house feel smaller. Daniel was working late, as always. I made tea. Evan came in, barefoot, in sweatpants and a dark shirt that clung slightly to his chest from the humidity. I offered him a mug. He took it. Our fingers touched. Just briefly. But his didn't pull away immediately. Neither did mine. We stood in the kitchen, quiet. The only sound the rain and the soft tick of the old clock above the stove. "Thanks," he said, finally. I nodded. "It's just tea." Still, he didn't move. I didn't either. The air felt thick. My robe, yes, even then, cinched tight. But I remembered the feel of the fabric against my skin. And I wondered, without meaning to, if he'd noticed it too. That night I didn't sleep well. I stared at the ceiling and listened to the storm quiet. I thought of his fingers, warm, dry, rough at the tips. I thought of the way he said still, like it meant more than it should have. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. Made coffee. Stood by the sink in silence. Evan came in, nodded, and poured himself a cup. He leaned against the counter and said nothing. I did the same. We didn't need to speak. We were already saying too much. He asked me, later that day, what I used to do. Before what, he didn't say. But I answered anyway, told him about the gallery, the classes, the trips to New York that I don't miss, but still think about. "You still paint?" he asked. "No. Why not?" I shrugged. Life. He didn't press. He just said, "That's a shame," and left the room. I stared after him, suddenly very aware of the quiet again, how heavy it had become. When Daniel got home, he asked if I wanted to go out that weekend. A dinner, maybe a movie. I said yes without meaning it, because I was thinking about the question Evan didn't ask, and the way his silence stayed longer than his footsteps. The tea, the robe, the look. That part is still coming. But I already knew, in some buried way, that I wouldn't forget it once it arrived. Not because of what happened, but because of what almost did. It was Saturday. The kind of Saturday that unfolds without asking. No alarms. No list on the fridge. Just the loose weave of time and quiet, the hush of a house that belongs to itself for a few hours. Daniel had left early. I heard the front door close while I was still floating in that between state of sleep and not. His footsteps were brisk, purposeful. He said something about a roast, a special kind he wanted to try, and I murmured a yes without opening my eyes. I stayed in bed long after he was gone, eyes on the ceiling, listening to the distant sound of a bird I couldn't name. Eventually, I rose. No hurry, no destination. The floor felt cool under my feet. I went to the bathroom and stood under the hot stream of the shower for longer than I usually allow myself. The water hissed against tile. My hair clung to my neck. I turned the handle all the way to heat and let it sting just a little. I wanted to feel something. Something real. I wrapped myself in my robe, the old one. The blue one that had lost its color in places. The one that remembered me better than I remembered myself. I didn't knot it tight. I didn't think about it at all. Downstairs, the light was gray. The kind of morning light that doesn't bother to announce itself. It just exists. I hadn't expected to see him, Evan. He was always quiet in the mornings. Respectful. Invisible almost. But as I reached the kitchen, I heard the clatter of a spoon and the low hum of the kettle. "You want tea?" His voice carried softly from around the corner. I blinked. Sure. He didn't come in right away. I heard him moving, calm and unhurried, the way people move when they feel at ease in a space. That realization prickled somewhere under my skin. He knew where the mugs were. He knew which drawer had the spoons. He didn't ask. I sat at the kitchen table, tucking one leg under me. The robe shifted. The tie sat loose at my waist, the collar open enough to feel air on my skin. I didn't adjust it. I crossed my arms, not to hide anything, just to hold myself. He entered quietly, 2 mugs in hand. Steam curled like soft threads between us. He set mine in front of me, and for a moment, he didn't move. He looked at me. Not accidentally. Not lazily. Not even boldly. Just deeply. Like he was trying to understand something, or remember it. It lasted seconds. Maybe less. But I felt it stretch, pull, settle in the space between my chest and my spine. Then he sat. We said nothing at first. Only the tiny sounds of sipping and breath and the distant tick of the hallway clock. I glanced at him once. His eyes were on the rim of his mug, his thumb circling the edge like he was smoothing out an invisible thought. So, I said, and my voice sounded too full for such a small word. How's the book? He looked up slowly. Bleak, he said. A faint smile. But honest. I nodded. Honesty's hard to read sometimes. Harder to live. His words settled. Not like a stone, but like a blanket. I looked at my tea, but I wasn't thirsty. I wanted to ask about the girl. The one he left. Or who left him. I never got the full story. But that wasn't really what I wanted to know. What I wanted was harder to name. The robe slipped slightly at the shoulder. Not much. Barely noticeable. Except he noticed. And I noticed him noticing. He didn't stare. His gaze moved and stopped, as if something had caught his attention, but he didn't want to hold it too long. A flicker. But deliberate. I didn't move to fix it. I just sat there, holding the mug between my palms like it might tether me. Did you always live here? He asked suddenly. This house. He nodded. No. Daniel bought it before we married. I moved in after. It was bigger than I needed. Still is. Feels quiet. Too quiet. He looked around. No. Just. Deliberate. I liked that word. Deliberate. Like someone had arranged the stillness with care. I'm sorry, I said. I don't know why. He tilted his head. For what? I hesitated. You being here. The awkwardness of it. He shook his head. It's not awkward. But it was. Not in the traditional sense. There were no uncomfortable silences. No missed cues. Just something else. Something that hummed beneath our words, rising and falling with every glance we did, or didn't, exchange. The steam between us had thinned. I reached for the sugar I didn't need, stirring too long, watching the swirl. I had a dream, I said, not really knowing why. He waited. I was in a hallway. Endless doors. And I kept opening the wrong ones. Over and over. What was behind them? Rooms I used to live in. He nodded. And the right door? I never found it. He looked down, then back at me. Maybe you weren't supposed to. That silenced me. We drank. The tea cooled. The morning didn't move forward. It just lingered. Like both of us were afraid of the next thing, whatever it was, arriving too soon. He leaned back in the chair, arms crossed. You always wear that robe? My breath caught. Yes, it suits you. A pause. Comfortable. Another pause. He smiled. Not at me. Just at the word. I should have left. I should have turned the conversation, diffused it with a joke or a change of subject. But I didn't. Instead, I looked at the edge of the table. The grain of the wood. The faint ring from a mug left too long once. Thanks for the tea, I said eventually. He stood slowly. Anytime. And he walked out. Just like that. I heard him go upstairs. Each step careful. Not hesitant. Just aware. When Daniel came home, I was still at the table. He said something cheerful. Something about the butcher and rosemary. I nodded. Evan came down, all politeness and casual grace. Smells good, he said. Daniel offered him a drink. They spoke. I don't remember what about. Because I was still in that chair, my fingers grazing the loose tie of my robe, the knot I hadn't tightened. the glance he hadn't taken back, and the silence that now lived, quietly, deliberately, inside my chest. It didn't begin with a touch. It began with something softer, harder to name. A glance that didn't rush away. A breath held just a beat too long. A shift in the air, subtle and full of tension, like the pause between thunder and rain. It began with a knowing not between us, but within me. After that morning, after the robe and the tea and the way neither of us looked away, I found myself moving through the house differently. As if I'd slipped into a parallel version of my own life, one where everything looked the same but hummed with some quiet danger. The robe hung on the back of the bedroom door, as always. But when I looked at it now, it felt like it had been worn in front of a mirror I hadn't meant to look into. I found myself touching it. Not wearing it, not yet. Just touching the collar, the knot, the place where it had opened. I couldn't stop thinking about the way his eyes had lowered, stopped, then lifted again. Like he had asked a question with no words and waited for an answer I didn't give, not out loud. Nothing had happened, but I couldn't stop replaying it. I told myself it was just a moment, but it echoed. In the days that followed, I caught myself watching Evan without meaning to. Not watching in the obvious sense, just noting. The way he stood when he thought no one was around. The way he closed the fridge with his hip. The way he drank tea like it was the only warm thing left in the world. He started making 2 cups in the morning. He never asked if I wanted one. He just brought it. He'd place the mug down next to me at the kitchen table on the windowsill, by the couch. I'd thank him. He'd nod. But always, there was that quiet. It wrapped around us like steam from the kettle. Familiar. Intimate. Unsafe. I found myself dressing slower. Letting sweaters fall looser. Choosing blouses with softer fabric, lighter touches. I told myself it was comfort. But I knew it wasn't. I knew it in the way I stood longer in front of the mirror. In the way I lingered near rooms he might walk into. Once, I passed by the bathroom just as he stepped out. He was drying his hands, sleeves pushed up, damp hair curling slightly at the back of his neck. He smiled, polite, nothing more, and I smiled back. But that moment hovered. His scent followed me down the hallway, light and sharp. I breathed it in longer than I should have. Daniel didn't notice anything. He was buried in work. A new project meant longer hours, distracted dinners. We spoke in to-do lists. Pick up dry cleaning. Don't forget to call your sister. I kept up appearances. But I'd already started withdrawing in ways too quiet to track. At night, Daniel would fall asleep with his back turned. I would lie awake, listening, thinking. Evan's room was down the hall. Sometimes I imagined the sound of his breathing. Not in a lustful way, just in a human way. Reassuring. Unsettling. One morning, I walked into the kitchen earlier than usual. I thought I was alone, but he was there, barefoot, wearing an old shirt that clung to him in the low light. He didn't speak. He just looked at me, and I looked back. And I didn't cross my arms. I didn't adjust my robe. I just walked past him, brushed close. Our shoulders nearly touched. I felt the warmth of him along my skin long after I'd stepped away. That night, I stood in the bedroom holding the robe. I ran my fingers along the inside collar. I brought it to my face. It still smelled faintly of steam and morning and the silence we'd shared. I wore it to bed. I didn't wear anything beneath it. Not for seduction. For memory. The next morning, he saw me in it again. This time in the living room. I was curled up with a book I wasn't reading. He paused in the doorway. Said nothing. I didn't look up. But I felt his eyes on me. A soft pull, like a tide. He didn't linger. But his silence did. Later, I found a note on the counter. Just a list of groceries he thought we might need. But at the bottom, in small script, he'd written, I'll make tea tomorrow if you want it. No signature. Just the offer. And I realized then, this thing between us wasn't about tea. It wasn't even about wanting, not in the usual sense. It was about attention. And attention, when you've lived without it, feels like oxygen. I kept the note in my pocket the rest of the day. I went through the motions of life, folding towels, answering calls, making dinner, but my fingers kept brushing that folded paper. Like a second pulse. When I undressed that night, I looked at myself in the mirror. Not with shame. Not even curiosity. Just honesty. I touched the place where the robe opened that morning. The skin just below my collarbone. I didn't know if you remembered, but I did. And that was enough to make everything feel different. The robe hung quietly behind the door again. The tie still frayed, still loose. And I still hadn't tightened it. The last morning passed like fog through lace, light that doesn't warm, air that carries no scent. It slipped through the house and settled in its corners, still and too aware. Evan was leaving. He had said it casually, the way people announce temporary things. Found a place near work, he'd said over dinner 2 nights before. Daniel had smiled, offered to help with the move. I had nodded and folded my napkin too many times in my lap. That night, I lay awake while Daniel slept beside me, his back warm and slow breathing. I stared at the ceiling, listening for footsteps that never came. The hallway was dark and still. And I knew, in some quiet part of myself, that nothing would happen. Not now. Not ever. Not the way it could have. And still, I couldn't sleep. That next morning, the one I would carry long after his name no longer lived in our shared spaces, I woke before the sun. I dressed without thinking. Jeans, a soft sweater. Nothing remarkable. Nothing noticeable. But I dabbed perfume at my wrists. I told myself it was habit. Downstairs, the kettle hissed softly on the stove. I set out the blue mugs, the ones from that morning. The morning of the robe, the steam, the look, the not looking away. He came in quietly. Always that way, no heavy steps, no clearing throat. Just presence. Like a shift in light. Morning, he said. I didn't turn. Morning. He leaned against the doorway while I poured. I didn't ask how he slept. I didn't ask if he was ready. The answers felt too final. We sat in the kitchen, the table between us, the steam rising in slow curls. He didn't drink. Just held the mug in both hands. Neither did I. The silence was warmer than the tea. I always liked the light in this kitchen, he said. I looked up. Why? He shrugged. It makes the ordinary look softer. There were 100 things I could have said. I didn't say any of them. Instead, I asked, do you think it'll be quieter, your new place? He smiled faintly. Different kind of quiet, maybe. Less intentional. I let that word sit. Intentional. You'll like it, I said, eventually. Maybe. He looked out the window. A neighbor's car started somewhere down the block. A bird called twice. The ordinary world returned to its rhythm. But I wasn't in it. I was in the space between sips. The space between breath and thought. The space where the tie hadn't been tightened. He spoke again. I think I'll miss the tea most. I smiled. You'll survive. You think. I looked at him then. Really looked. I know. The moment stretched. Not into anything dramatic. Just something full. He stood slowly and picked up his bag. Not large. Not heavy. Just enough. He paused at the door. The same door where it had all begun. Where the first silence passed between us like a match struck in the dark. Thank you, he said. I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. So I nodded. He stepped out onto the porch. Cold air rushed in. He didn't shiver. He turned back, just once. I didn't look away, he said, because I didn't want to forget. I wanted to answer. to tell him I hadn't pulled the tie closed because I wanted to be remembered. But he was already gone. The door closed softly behind him. And I was alone. The tea had gone cold. And still I sat there. Not mourning. Not aching. Just still. That evening, Daniel came home with a bottle of wine and 2 steaks, smiling like a man who believes gestures can still rearrange distance. "Thought we could eat outside," he said. I nodded. The sky was pale. The trees motionless. I helped set the table, brought out the napkins we only used when people visited. We spoke about the neighbor's new dog, about a project at work, about how the mornings were getting colder. I nodded in the right places, smiled when he did, but my hands stayed cold. Later, in the quiet of the bedroom, I stood at the mirror, not to examine myself, but to see if anything remained. The robe was folded neatly on the bed. I had washed it that afternoon. It smelled like lavender and nothing. I picked it up, held it to my chest, not out of sentiment, but to remember the weight of that moment, of the glance, of being seen. I didn't cry. Instead, I opened the drawer and put it away. Daniel was already asleep. He reached for me in his sleep, hand falling across my stomach. I let it rest there. I didn't flinch, but I didn't move toward him, either, because I wasn't where he thought I was. I was still in that kitchen, still watching steam rise, still remembering the silence that had spoken louder than any promise. In the days that followed, I returned to life. I made lists, answered calls, folded clothes. The world stayed intact. Evan didn't call. He didn't write. He didn't need to. The point of it, all of it, had never been a future. It had been the interruption, the glimpse, the pause. One morning, I passed by his old room. It looked the same, but the air had shifted, as if the walls had exhaled. Daniel walked in behind me, leaned against the frame. "Feels bigger," he said. I nodded. "It does." He placed a hand on my shoulder. Squeezed once. Familiar. But I didn't lean in. That afternoon, I took a walk alone. I ended up near the market, then the park. The same one Evan and I had never walked to together. But I thought of him there anyway. A man passed me wearing the same kind of coat. I turned. It wasn't him. But the ache wasn't disappointment. It was memory. I sat on a bench, closed my eyes, and remembered the heat of his hand not touching mine, the weight of a silence that had made me feel more than words ever had. I didn't want him back. That wasn't the point. I wanted the version of myself that had existed in that kitchen. The woman in the robe, fair-skinned, soft-shouldered, silent, and seen. And that's what I held on to. Not him. Her. She had looked up. She hadn't fixed the knot. She had let herself be known. Even if just for a moment. Even if only once. I stood. The wind lifted the edges of my coat. I walked home slowly, steadily. The world was the same. But I was not. Because now I knew what it felt like to be seen. To not flinch. To not explain. And to let the tea go cold. Because some moments are more important than warmth. Some moments are everything, and they pass like fog through lace. But they remain. Inside. Soft. Unspoken. And unforgettable.